Welcome back to the table. Today we're going to do something that we haven't done.
We haven't done this?
Well, you and I haven't done it.
That's true.
And if you haven't looked at the thumbnail, this is our top 10 two-player games. Now,
if you just blindly clicked on the link without even looking at the title of the video or the thumbnail.
Yeah, if you did that, thank you very much.
Thanks for taking the risk.
We appreciate your faith in our channel. But no, today we're going to be talking about our top 10 two-player games, and we want to caveat this. This is not games that we think are good with two players that might be for more players.
Right.
These are games that are built specifically for two players in mind.
Primarily for two players.
There will probably be some games on this list that you could play with 3 or 4 players.
Yeah, but I don't recommend it.
They're meant for 2 players or maybe 2 teams.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah.
But even in that case, I think it's better just to play with 2 players.
For sure, I would agree. And last thing, this is not a list of 2021 top 2-player games. It's not a list of all time. It is kind of both our current top 10 lists for 2-player games.
My top 10 favorite 2-player games to play
right now. Yeah. So with that said,
let's get into number 10. Number 10 for me is Star Realms. This is a game that I've enjoyed for a very long time.
Yeah.
I remember when this game first came out. It is a competitive deck building game that has a space kind of sci-fi theme where you're basically building a fleet of ships to battle your opponent. And this game has gone through a lot of revisions. A lot of new sets have come out. There's a mobile app you can play on your phone. I think even on Steam, there's a digital version of this game. So it's easy to play. It's super accessible, and it's just fun. I mean, there are so many cool elements to this game. It's a deck builder, of course.
Yeah.
Where you're kind of competing to buy the cards in the row, but you're also directly doing damage to the other opponent. A lot of the cards that you're buying can attack or can do damage to your opponent's bases, to your opponent's health point, and part of the whole thing is deciding if you want to build an economy or if you want to go heavy on damage. Because building an economy lets you get some of those more expensive ships, but if you get a really small army that's really cheap and you're just hammering away at damage every single turn, it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, and that one's really pure. I mean, deck builders usually do boil down to economy or damage in some way, shape, or form.
I mean, some don't have damage at all. It's just score-based.
But you're either attacking or collecting cards or maybe trying to do a little bit of both. And that one is a great 2-player experience for doing that and for teaching deck building just to one other person.
Because that's what really the main thing you're doing.
It's pretty pure.
And the cool thing, I mean, my favorite thing about it that really revolutionized it is the combo system where you have these different factions and a lot of the cards give you bonuses for having cards played from that same faction. I know Ascension does this a little bit, but Star Realms really hammered that in, and there's just some really, really satisfying games in that.
Yeah. Well, my number 10 is not a deck builder.
Okay.
It is a trick-taking game. I have it right here. This is Jekyll versus Hyde, and this is about as new as it gets for this list.
It just came out like a month ago, right?
I'm not even sure how available this is as of time of posting, but this is a 2-player, asymmetric, trick-taking game. I've already talked about it on the channel quite a bit. We've even played it on the channel. But one player plays Jekyll, of course. One player plays Hyde. The idea of the trick-taking, though, is when you're Dr. Jekyll, thematically, you want to keep control. You want to maintain a balance, right? So you want to, in any given round, win as many tricks as you lose. And there's 10 tricks per round. Hyde, on the other hand, he wants to go crazy. He wants to win as many as he can or lose as many as he can. So what it does as a trick-taking game, you kind of have to wrap your head around, what am I trying to do? Because even though I understand those rules thoroughly, almost every time I play this, in any trick-taking game, you kind of get into that groove of like, oh, I'm taking tricks, I'm taking tricks. If you're Dr. Jekyll, you don't want to keep that rolling.
Right, you want to stop at a certain point.
You need to pivot. And the fact is, you can't play really hard to win tricks without planning the rest of the round so that you can ensure that you're going to lose tricks.
Right, you don't want to accidentally win a trick. The last trick you could accidentally win, and that
no, well, you
can.
You can completely get into a rhythm where you're like, oh, I can't stop winning.
Right.
Like they saw that I was winning. So and Hyde all the while, if you're winning as Jekyll, is going to sit there and go, okay, well, I'm just going to keep letting him win, and kind of strategically plan so that they do. And it's really interesting because each round, the difference between the tricks is how far this little marker will move on this board of Hyde changing from Jekyll all the way to Hyde. And Hyde's going to win if that marker gets all the way to the end across 3 different rounds. Plus, there's all these different powers that come into play and potions that you can play a card, play a potion, change trump effectively, do all sorts of things to change up the board and kind of like create chaos in the middle of the game. And it is a trick-taking game that completely keeps you thinking, kind of a la The Crew. I think The Crew, for a lot of people, made people kind of go, okay,
Yeah.
I've got to really think about how trick-taking games are played now. Same thing goes with Jekyll versus Hyde.
And what I really appreciate about this game is the length. You can play this game, even at 3 rounds, you can play it in 30 minutes.
Oh, or quicker.
Or quicker, yeah.
This is the kind of game that you will absolutely guaranteed, you'll play it once, and then you'll want to switch roles so the other person can play Hyde and you can play Jekyll, because inevitably one of you are going to think, it's harder to play the one I just...
It's always harder to play the one you are.
Or the one that lost.
Right, exactly.
Whoever lost, that must be the harder role, but that is not the case. And that Jekyll versus Hyde is my number 10.
All right, well, number 9?
Yeah.
My number 9 is also a fairly new game. It's called Land versus Sea. And this game kind of took me by surprise. It came out earlier this year. It was kind of, I think, a quiet release. I mean, I didn't hear a lot of hype about it. And to be honest, I was like, okay, it's a tile placement game. But this idea, this concept of it being land versus sea, a 2-player game where 1 player is land and 1 player is sea, is so interesting.
Yeah.
Like, just by describing that, it's like, okay, how does that work? Well, as you're building out this map, you're placing a tile every single turn, and they're double-sided, and you're adding both to the sea and the land, because every tile has a little bit of both. And as the land player, I want to make these giant land masses that are contained.
Yeah.
And as the sea player, you want to make these giant sea masses that are contained.
But the tiles have both
Right.
on them.
And so the crux of the game is, how do I close off my section without helping you close off your section? Also without giving you an opportunity to make my section bigger. Because part of the game is just not letting your opponent close off their section. You have a giant sea area, and I'm just adding sea to your area. I'm not worried about closing off my land. I just want to make your sea so big that you can never close it off.
Yeah, and there's more subtleties to this game too. It's not just simply you've got these tiles and you play them and you're trying to build those pieces of land or sea. But there are some powers on some of those tiles.
Yeah.
You might play a tile that lets you steal a tile from the other player, which can be massive.
It can be.
Because the tiles also, by the way, are double-sided. So when you take tiles off of these stacks, you're always going to have 2 at the beginning of your turn. And you can look at the other player and go, okay, what's on your tiles? But not really, because you will never know what's on the other side. They can sit there and look at them, and they may have some hidden information there that really makes it far trickier to figure out what you're wanting to do, because you might do something and you might be sitting there hoping, oh, I'm going to do this, but if one of the other sides of their tiles has something that I don't know and it's this, you could go out there and really kind of take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting game, and like Ryan said, and this, by the way, this was also my number 9.
Oh, well, there you go.
Or we matched up on number 9s, but Land versus Sea is the most competitive feeling tile placement game that I think I've played in recent memory, because it really does feel... Tile placement's usually kind of friendly, and you're just kind of doing your own thing. The fact that this is all in one area, kind of a la Carcassonne.
Yeah, a little bit like Carcassonne.
But far more head-to-head.
Yeah, I think of it like Isle of Skye, if somebody else could come in and mess up the map that you're trying to make, right?
Kind of.
And it has a lot of modules. It has some advanced scoring modes, too, that made the game even more tense. You can make mountain ranges or these ranges of coral. You can connect ships.
Yeah, these routes.
Yeah,
basically.
with like wagons to make these trade routes, and whoever has the most of either ships or wagons on that route scores points. I mean, there's a wide variety of things. And I do want to mention there is actually a 3-player variant to this game, which is actually pretty neat.
Yeah.
It does change up the game. I mean, this is still primarily meant to be a 2-player experience, but if you wanted to play teams, you could play teams 2 versus 2. You could play a 3rd player who's only scoring those mountains in the coral.
That is
which
the
is
cool
interesting. But really, it is, when you play it purely 2-player, it's quite an experience.
Yeah, so that's Land versus Sea, both mine and Ryan's number 9.
Yeah.
Do you want to go with your number 8?
Sure, let's go right to number 8. Number 8 for me is Lawyer Up. This was a Kickstarter game from a few years ago.
From Rock Manor, right?
From Rock Manor, and this game is cool in the way that it simulates court. We played this together.
We did.
I don't know.
I think we did a round 1 for
We did a round 1. I couldn't remember if it was a live stream, but it's cool. You're collecting evidence for this case, and one player is the prosecution, one player is the defense, and you have these jurors that you're trying to influence, and there's all these different icons that represent what is important to that particular juror, and you're trying to find evidence that fits your argument that also sways those jurors to your side, which I think is, it's super, super fun.
It's
and
fun,
really interesting.
And it's really thematic, too, because there'll be cards that you get, because there is a prosecution deck and a defense deck, and you're going to have cards that come up that feel very like, oh, this is that moment.
This is your smoking gun. You got him.
And it may literally be a smoking gun.
Right.
Like, you have that card where you're like, oh, when am I going to play this? But then things might change, and you might not be able to take advantage of it as much as you thought.
And you can counter evidence. You could get evidence thrown out of the case. And
yeah, it really hurts when you think you play that one card or you take that one turn, and then someone has the card in their hand that kind of foils that plan. And thematically, if you let yourself get into it, it really does kind of capture that vibe of like that tension and back and forth dynamic in a courtroom.
Yeah, it has that kind of Phoenix Wright vibe. You just want to throw down a card and shout, "I object." And you can even you can approach the bench even during the game. It's very thematic. I don't know how accurate it is to the actual experience of being a trial lawyer, but from the outside, it feels like it. It makes you feel like you're in a courtroom drama, and there are a ton of different cases you can play, and it's not like a narrative experience. You can play these cases over and over again. You're not trying to solve a mystery here. You're just using a particular set of cards with a particular victim, and there are a ton of expansion boxes for this, and each come with several new cases, and if I'm right, there's even a supernatural.
Well, there's a Salem Witch
right?
Trial one, and I haven't played that one. I backed it, and I had, I think, all of it, or at least 2 of the extra boxes, and the one I haven't tried is the Salem Witch Trial. It's cool, and they have different art there too. Yeah, it's like Ryan said, I don't think it is an accurate simulation of the court system, but with that said, maybe the U.S. court system would be wise to adapt just playing lawyer
play the
up.
card game. Yeah.
So my number 8 is a game called Fugitive,
Yeah.
and this one's from Fowers Games. This is a cool hidden movement game, and unlike most hidden movement games, this is 2 players, of course. And one player is playing the Fugitive, the other player is playing the Marshal. And this is a card game. So there's going to be basically this string of cards that's built throughout the game that is kind of, think Catch Me If You Can. And in fact, the graphic design here is very Catch Me If You Can.
It really does look like that, yeah.
But the Fugitive is on the run, and on the Fugitive's turn, they're going to be playing cards into that row. And the row is sequential, but the cards aren't face up necessarily, so you don't see what the sequence is, but you know that it's going to start at 0. And the Fugitive is basically trying to get to the point where they can play the number 42 or 43 card, I can't remember which. And when they do that, they're going to win. The Marshal is trying to uncover all of the hideouts, which are effectively every face-down card in the row. So what happens is the Fugitive is going to play a card, say there's a 0 here, they play the next card. That next card could be a 1, a 2, or a 3, naturally. But as the Marshal, you don't know. And the Fugitive can play extra cards underneath it to sprint, so it could be a little more than that. So effectively, the Fugitive is playing a bunch of different numbered cards sequentially raising, but with gaps, and the Marshal's trying to guess what those are, to basically uncover all the hideouts to catch the Fugitive. So it is literally a chase of a hidden movement game.
And just like any hidden movement game, you're using a lot of deduction elements to try to guess ahead of what you think that the Fugitive is planning, which is super interesting too, because it's not. So I'm not looking at you. This is not a lying game. This isn't a game where I'm like,
no,
there's no bluffing.
This is deduction.
Is this it? No, it's pure deduction based on the cards that have been played. You know kind of the range of numbers that could possibly be out, but you don't know exactly how far the Fugitive has gotten.
Well, yeah, and you don't know, when they use those sprint cards, you don't know what sprints cards. Some have 1 foot, some have 2, so they let them go a little further. There are also events that you can play with that kind of change things up and add a little more chaos. And the Marshal, on their turn, effectively at the end, they're guessing as many hideouts as they want. The rub there is if you guess any of them wrong. So if you think, I think I know 3 of the hideouts, and you guess 1 and 2 and 3, and the third one's wrong, you have to guess all the numbers at once.
Yeah.
And then the Fugitive just says, if one of them's wrong, sorry, and they don't uncover any of them. So you might want to not push your luck and just guess one that you know for sure, or you might want, it just depends on how far ahead of him you are.
It's a really interesting twist on hidden movement, for sure.
It really is, really is.
Moving really in a straight line.
And it's super simple to play. This is easy, the box is tiny, you can travel with this thing. It does end up taking some table space, so this is not something you're going to be playing on an airplane.
But again, it's like a 30 to 45-minute game.
Yeah, very, very tight game.
All right, are we on to 7?
We are on to 7.
7 for me is Unmatched Battle of Legends.
I should have figured.
Which, yeah, I mean, I've loved this game since it came out. There's a lot of reasons that I love this game. For one, it is a cool 2-player tactical combat game. It can be played at 3 and 4 with weird variants, but I get right to the pure 2-player mode. This is where it really shines. What's so cool about Unmatched, and I've talked about this for years on the channel, I think, is the ability to combine these cool characters from all of these different IPs or fictions or legends. I mean, we have, I don't even know, maybe 20 characters now with a whole set of Marvel characters about to come out that are awesome.
That is the big draw, and I've played it a little, but not as much as you.
I've played it quite a bit.
You can mix and match as much as you want?
You can mix and match as much as you want. One of the matches ups I played not too long ago was Sherlock Holmes versus the Velociraptors from Jurassic Park, which was a really
that might be better than
cool,
the joke I was going to make. That's a great example.
I mean, and it sounds silly, but that was the game. It played out really well, and what I really appreciate about this game is the artwork and the design that goes into it. All the artwork is done by Mondo Studios. They do those really cool movie posters if you've ever seen those. And every character has a unique deck of cards that's thematic. They have a unique, usually some kind of assistant or associate, some kind of ally. It depends. I mean, there's the Buffy box came out not too long ago. And then more recently, we had Deadpool.
Yeah, you just got Deadpool recently, right?
And yeah, I did. And I posted some photos of this on Instagram, Facebook, Discord, wherever. But Deadpool uses cards from all of the other sets.
Oh.
He has just handwritten his own stuff over them. Oh. So it's like super.
So he's not literally using other cards.
Not literally.
The cards in his deck they look like other cards.
They're all cards from other decks, but they have like Post-it notes over them, or like he's scribbled things out, or he's drawn pictures of himself over the other artwork. I mean,
that's brilliant.
It is brilliant. It very much feels like Deadpool. I mean, it's a fun deck to play, and I've gotten to play some of the Marvel stuff that's coming out. I can't super talk about it yet. The heroes have been announced. You can go online and see who they're going to be. They're also super thematic. I mean, they each one really feels like the Marvel character. So there's plenty of Unmatched to come. Volume 2 is about to release.
No.
So if you missed all of the first wave of content, it's fine. You can jump in at any point. You don't want to miss Volume 2 because they have a whole other set of heroes that are really cool. So.
Very cool. Well, my number 7 is not Unmatched.
I assumed it wasn't.
But like many of our 2-player games, it is very, very head-to-head and has a bit of that tug-of-war aspect to it. And, spoiler alert, it's probably maybe even higher on your list.
Oh.
My number 7 is Watergate. And this one's from Capstone Games. We played this, what, was it 3 years ago now?
Yeah.
That it came out at an Origins
like forever
or something?
ago. It was at Origins. Clay had gotten an early copy from Capstone.
And we got a chance to play it. And a lot of us did. And some other people from some podcasts that we're friends with were all there playing it. My wife taught me this game, which is a rarity. I'm usually the one teaching a game. But Watergate, it's not higher on my list, by the way, because I do think one of the things about Watergate is that the theme. Mm-hmm. I try to play this with my kids. Now, after you play it, people generally like it no matter what. But when people think Watergate, like my sons don't even know what Watergate was about.
Someone outside of the United States,
right.
You have even less of an idea of what Watergate was.
But with that said, regardless of the theme, you're playing this tug-of-war game that is really interesting, that is just built around playing a card and playing another card. And these cards are multi-use cards, which is one of my favorite things going on. And you can use a card to just basically generally grab some evidence. And there's this whole board where you're either trying to protect Nixon from the evidence, or on the other side, the press, you're trying to gather evidence and string it together. Mm-hmm. And the board is really cool. It's like one of those little push-pin boards. String it together to implicate Nixon. And it just goes back and forth and back and forth. And it's very asymmetric in terms of what you're doing and what you're trying to do, but also with some overlap in terms of the mechanics.
And you might be right. It might be on my list. So I'm not going to talk too much about it right now because I might bring it back up here in a little bit.
I think you will.
We'll have to see. But let's go on to number 6 then, yeah? So number 6 for me is Dice Throne. This is another huge game that also has Marvel set coming out now that I think about it. I didn't even make that connection. Dice Throne Marvel is just got done on Kickstarter. Dice Throne is cool. I'll tell you what. I'll be honest. I was so resistant to the idea of Dice Throne because I'm not a dice chucking fan.
No, games like a push your luck.
Yeah, it's push your luck, dice rolling, luck of the dice.
Sure.
And the first season, when the first season came out, was done in a very different way, and like they hadn't quite gotten their groove going. And season 1 was fun, but it wasn't, it didn't have what season 2 has. And season 2 had this big box with all of these character packs in game trays where you pulled one out and every character had this cool full art board and all their components in one game tray. And that sucked me in.
Yeah, well, the presentation of season 2 was huge.
And the presentation, this whole concept of like choose your fighter, kind of pull your fighter out of the box, go head to head against another fighter. And once I finally like let myself get past it and start playing it, I enjoyed it so much. I had to have all of it. And I went back and I got all of the season 1 stuff when they came out with the re-rolled. So now all of season 1 is in that same packaging with that cool same aesthetic that season 2 comes with. But that concept of choosing a fighter, like that we see in video games so often.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that more board games don't capitalize on that, because there's just something so satisfying of just looking at the box and seeing all the cool artwork of like all these characters, the paladin, the treant, the ninja, and just grabbing it. Like, I don't know, it's cool. It just feels cool.
It's the closest thing in board games to a character select screen.
Right.
You're basically, you open that big box, especially those new boxes, and they're all lined up there, and just the idea of like, I'm going to try this guy. And you pull it out, you open it all up, everything you need is right there. It's a lot of fun, and the Marvel one is pretty sweet.
I got to play the Marvel one. It was pretty great.
Oh, you've played the whole one, right?
I played some of it. I got to see all of it at BGG-Con a couple weeks ago. But again, like a fighting game, what I really appreciate about Dice Throne is that anyone can start playing it immediately. Just like button mashing in a game, you could just be rolling those dice doing damage, but the more you play any given character, the more you start to see some of the combos and synergies, and these characters have some real depth.
Oh, and flavor too.
And
they're not
real,
just like,
real flavor.
The characters don't yet, at least, feel like reskins of
not
each
at all.
other. The characters definitely have unique aspects, and particularly even some of the Marvel ones. The Marvel ones that we know of and how they work, they've continued to sort of advance what they're doing there with the mechanisms.
And this is another one of those games, like what David said, where it's like a 15 to 20 minute game, and then you're going to be like, okay, another one. Let me try a different character. Or let's do this again, or let's swap characters, because there's so many characters to try. It's just you'll get sucked in. I almost guarantee it.
Yeah, I often want to stick with the same character because if I lose, I want to just keep going. I want to try to figure out the one character that I had. So my next game doesn't have any characters. It is called Paris City of Lights. This is an abstract game from Devere that Ryan and I had a chance. In fact, we did a review of it. We did a live play of it, last year, 2 years ago,
I feel like maybe 2 years ago.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
But this is a really cool tile placement game set in Paris, and the box itself, speaking of presentation, is the board. So you take the lid off, and then the base box has the board sunken down in it, and it's even dual layered. What you're going to do is there's 2 phases in the game, which is really the cool aspect of this, because you really have to think. I think you and I both were kind of surprised after we played it, like,
the first time I played that, I completely underestimated the second half of the game.
Yeah, and you have to plan, because in the first phase of the game, you are either placing a foundation tile, if you will, which is just a square tile that has some colors on it. You're going to be one color, the other player's going to be the other, and then there's like a purple that is usable by both of us. If you don't do that on your turn, you're taking one of many polyomino building tiles for your supply. That's for later. Once the board is filled with the foundation, you go on to phase 2, which again has on your turn choices. You're either going to place one of those buildings, and the buildings have to be placed on at least a foundation of that same shape of all of your color, or maybe mixed with the purple. Or if you're not doing that, there's all these postcards around the board from Paris that will basically do different powers. So you might have planned such that, like, okay, well, I'm going to use that power. That'll allow me to effectively change the board a little bit so that it's going to let me play these tiles. But it's really interesting, because the first time you play it, no matter what, I guarantee phase 1 is going to end, and one player who's new to the game is going to say, oh, well, I barely collected any buildings.
Well, and that's the thing I was going to mention. My favorite thing about the game is that balance of, if you're not collecting buildings and your opponent's collecting a lot of buildings, you're getting kind of control of the board layout, and you're getting to like create some shapes that are very beneficial to you. But if you don't have the buildings to place in the second phase, it doesn't matter how well you position the board, because you'll have nothing to put on it. So you really have to strike that balance.
Right, and some of those powers will let you sort of play with that a little bit. There are some buildings that are effectively out on those powers. But it is a really interesting, thinky two-player game. And unlike Fugitive, this one is absolutely one that I think you could play in a small space.
Oh, yeah.
Other than having some of the
space at all.
tiles spread out, it is a very small footprint of a little box that's just sitting in the middle of the table. And it's Paris, City of Lights is the English translation.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to butcher the French pronunciation. But that one's from Devere, and it is my number 6.
All right, number 5 for me is Targi, and this is perhaps one of the meanest two-player games I have on my list. This game is all about blocking your opponent at every possible step. I mean, it's neat, the way that it works, because you have this grid of cards out there, and every card is either an action, like the cards on the outside are actions, and the cards on the inside are either cards that give you resources, special abilities, or cards that you can actually put into your little camp. And you're trying to kind of build out this camp in such a way that it scores points. You're scoring points in all these different ways. Some of the cards that you're grabbing also have in-game scoring points on them. But what's cool is you're placing your figure on one of the outer spaces. You can't place opposite that. But when you've placed 2 figures, you're taking the card that's in the middle. So basically, if you were making a line from one to the other, you're grabbing a card. So if I place one pawn, because I really want a card that's really juicy, my opponent can come and put them in the other axis, meaning no one gets that card now. They've effectively blocked me from it and them. And so you're going to be spending so much time just placing in other spots just to stop your opponents from getting that really juicy card. And there are some powers that let you take cards even if you didn't place on them. So setting up that perfect turn where you've blocked your opponent out of everything, meanwhile you have this card that lets you just take the card anyway, even though you were both blocked. It's really satisfying, but it's not a super long game either. So.
No.
It can feel bad, I think, if you're, not evenly matched. You got to kind of know, if you're teaching this game, maybe don't just beat up on them constantly. But when you've got 2 players that are about equal skill, it really becomes almost like a chess match of where you're placing those, trying to like bluff someone into thinking you want one card from the middle so that they block you, and really you set yourself up to take another card that might have benefited you otherwise. I mean, it's super hard to explain. Just talking about it.
It is tricky to explain. In fact, I just got a copy of this just recently from my secret meeple. We ran a secret meeple, and I got Targi among some other things. And I'm looking forward to trying this with Alicia because neither of us have played it.
You've never even played it?
I played Targi once a long time ago, but it's been long enough to where it's like I'm a fresh player. But if I played you, I feel like you'd have to go easy on me.
And I think that's part of any two-player game like this. Like if you're wanting the other player, especially if it's like a significant other, partner, roommate, somebody that you want to play games with you over and over again, don't just destroy them on your first play. I think that just goes without saying.
Yeah, and you don't have to go easy on them. You don't have to let someone win. But yeah, if you're wanting to spread the good word on board games, maybe don't destroy everyone you play.
Now, once you're on even level, then gloves are off. You go head to head and
exactly.
But I think that's true for teaching any game really. But that's a personal thing. But yeah, Targi definitely, if you haven't played that one, and I know this is one maybe a little more obscure, but I think that everyone that I talked to, as soon as they've played it, they've just loved it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk of Targi on our Discord.
Targi Talk?
Targi Talk.
Yeah.
We don't have a channel called Targi Talk,
it's funny,
but we might know.
Because I didn't own it either. I also got it from my secret meeple.
Oh, did you?
I really did.
Are we each other's secret meeple?
I got it because I know I had been talking a lot about it on Discord. I had gotten to play it earlier this year and fell in love with it, but I didn't own it. And
it is one of those games where you don't necessarily, like you play it, you like it, you might not necessarily buy it for yourself.
Right,
so
especially
really
the person you're playing with owns it. But it's good to have it now to be able to take it to new groups and play with new people.
For sure. Well, my next game isn't quite as mean, but like many of the games we're talking about, it is one that makes you constantly kind of think and rethink what you're doing and playing, which I think is really a common denominator with a lot of these, particularly two-player games. This one is Santorini, also from Roxley Games. Honestly, I think this is one of the... when did this come out? 2017, maybe?
It's a while ago.
It's been a while. I backed this on... It was one of the earlier games that I backed on Kickstarter. And the great thing about Santorini is it starts with a very, very basic game. In fact, the game that had existed, the designer had made it out of wood, and it didn't look anything like it does now. But then Roxley, as they do, like they've done with Dice Throne, have added a layer of development and polish in terms of presentation.
Oh, it looks like Santorini, the Greek city.
The board is
gorgeous.
The board is raised, and aside from the presentation alone, the gameplay is what does this for me. Because even the base mode is quite simple, but very fun. You're basically moving one of two pieces and building. And what you're trying to do is get on the top of a level 3 building, but there's a level 4 that can be capped so that you can't go on there by the other player. So it is very much a strategic dance around this board. The absolute coolest thing about this game, and probably the reason it's still so high on my list and in my collection, is all of these different power cards or character cards that you can take. You're playing these different gods, and when you do that, it completely changes how the game is played.
Oh yeah, and
you can win with a completely different win variable.
Right, that's what I was gonna say.
And my god might win one way, Ryan's might win another, so it also makes it absolutely asymmetric. And when you play several games in a row, what's really fun to do is take that deck, and every game you play, you just flip over a new god card. So you have to think every single game, like, oh, wait a minute, how am I playing
You're not
now?
using the same god card every single time with the same special ability.
Yeah, and you have to describe to your opponent, like, oh, here's who I am and here's how I can win. Because not only do you have to know how your character plays, your opponent absolutely has to know, because they need to make sure they don't let you win.
Well, that's the hardest part about the game.
Right.
I mean, any of these abstract games like this, it's almost more important to stop your opponent from winning than it is to try to win.
Exactly.
Because you can end up placing that one key building that they need, because you can only hop up like one level at a time. So if you make that little stairway for them, they're going to hop up it. Next thing you know, they've won, and you're like, why did I do that? Why did I not see that?
Yeah, and one of my favorite characters, I can't remember the name of the character, but there's a character who can win not by getting, well, you can always win by getting to the top. That win condition's always there. But there's one character who can win by jumping down to a
from the
grass
top.
spot. Not even from the top. I think it's from like a level 2 or level 2 space. If he jumps down, he wins. So what you're effectively doing as the opponent is running around like some sort of circus, building on the ground around them so that they can't jump down to the ground level, because if they jump down to the ground level, instant win for them, which is crazy.
I don't think I've even seen all of the different god cards that you can play in Santorini. And I have the Golden Fleece expansion with it as well, which I think a lot of people play with. That was so close to hitting my list, because it really, it's such a mental game.
It will always be on my list, and I've talked to people who had an experience with it and thought, meh, and I'm like, what? And then I find out that they never played with those cards.
Right, you kind of, I mean, it's good to learn the game without them, but you really want to at least try the game with them.
Well, like I said, I love the base game. Those cards elevate it more than any other game I've seen in terms of what like an expansion or a new element does for a game. But yeah, Santorini, that is my number 5.
All right, on to number 4. So I finally get to talk about it. Watergate is my number 4.
Number 4, okay.
David, I think you're not doing this game justice.
Well, I love it. I love it.
Watergate is one of my favorite 2-player games, and there's the only reason it didn't end up higher is because you'll see why. Some of the other games on my list are absolute classics.
There's a lot of good 2-player games.
There are a lot of good 2-player games, but Watergate is so much fun. That idea of like either playing as the editor or playing as Nixon, and that board that David talked about, that little like, there's like all these strings connecting to Nixon, and your whole goal is to get evidence onto your side of the tug of war so you can put it out on that board in such a smart way that you can connect 2 people to Nixon. And if you can connect 2 people to Nixon, you prove that he was a criminal, you win. But Nixon's constantly burning evidence. He's turning some of those witnesses to his side, which means they're not available to you anymore. And the core of the game, that row, I guess, that tug of war row, where you're moving not just the pieces of evidence, but also the initiative counter to determine who gets to go first next round, and these little power tokens, which if you let Nixon get all 5, he just flat out wins the game anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that Nixon goes after right away.
Right.
That's the easy thing for Nixon to go, oh, well, I'm just going to pull this as much as I can.
Yeah, and you as the editor have to not only stop Nixon from gaining that, but you also want to keep the initiative. You also want to keep the evidence. You also want to keep him from turning people against you. Regardless of the theme, and I'll be honest, I'm young enough that Watergate doesn't have any real meaning to me other than the movies.
And amazingly enough, me too.
Other than the movies about it, which is fine. I mean, coming into the theme, it's like, okay, I get it. I know that Nixon was, under trial by the press. And like that's all you really need to know to play the game. It doesn't require any kind of like historical knowledge to win.
No, not at all. I think that knowledge, or at least even a vague knowledge of it, of what happened, is probably enough to understand the flavor of a lot of the cards.
And that is what helps.
And the flavor and the history in those cards is actually kind of interesting. When I did play that with my son, who didn't know anything about it, it was almost a little bit of an education for him.
It definitely
It's like,
is.
well, who is this guy? And I'm like, oh,
Right.
well, and some of them I didn't even know. But it's one of those things that brings history into board gaming in a really interesting way. Plus, this is a game mechanic. I mean, this is not unlike Twilight Struggle in
Right.
terms of how you're playing it. This is a game mechanic that I could see used for all sorts of different themes. Like, I just love the way it
tug
plays.
of war. And the multi-use cards being like, there's actually several uses for the cards because you're either going to be moving evidence, you're going to be moving those tokens, you're going to be playing them for the ability, and some of those abilities are going to have multiple options, and some of them are going to remove those cards out of the game. They're just like one-time use cards. And again, this is another game that's about 30 to 45 minutes, maybe even less if you're two really skilled players. I can't recommend Watergate enough.
Yeah, it's good. A lot of tension, and like we said on Santorini, where that was a game where you're trying oftentimes to just not let the other person win. It's not about you winning necessarily as much as it is that. This one does a good balance.
There is a really good balance.
You have to not let them win, but then in the next turn you have to do something to try to win.
You have to keep pushing your own win condition forward. The game is kind of weighted towards Nixon because if time runs out, Nixon wins. So it's a little easier for the editor to move things, but it's weighted in a really balanced way that makes both sides feel different.
Yeah.
The pacing just feels different for both sides.
Yeah, Watergate is a great game, and it would be higher on my list, but like I said, I think that history thing
It's not the most accessible or common theme.
Not thematically, anyway. My next one has nothing to do with Nixon. I'll tell you that. The next one on my list has been on probably as many top 10 two-player board game lists as there are.
Okay.
For a very long time. It is Jaipur.
Oh, yeah.
Jaipur has been out, I don't even know when this came out, but it's been around for as long as I've been playing modern board games. And this is a pure two-player game, very small footprint. You could play this anywhere. This is a game that you can absolutely travel with. And I've never met anyone who thought Jaipur wasn't fun.
No, it is fun. It's
like
hard. It's fun. It's simple.
It's simple.
It's very easy to play while you're hanging out, waiting for your food to get there. I've played it at a bar, just having a drink, playing a game like that.
Well, and even the app, Alicia and I have played the app when we're even remote from one another. I mean, this game, and just so to give you a sense, if you've never heard of Jaipur, it's this basic set collection, but there's this little row of cards, and on your turn, you're either taking maybe a card or some cards into your hand, and you have a hand limit, which is kind of one of the big rubs in the game. You're trying to collect sets, but not just those cards so that you can play them, but then you're basically spending cards out of your hand as an alternative to taking cards in order to take some of these chips that are going to score you points. And there's all these different colors all the way up to like red and gold. And you're doing that until 3, I think, of those chip stacks is empty.
I think it's 3.
It has a player-controlled dynamic in terms of how long it's going to go. And there is that tension where you're like, okay, I've collected another red. How many red do they have? Because should I seize this red? Because what I didn't mention is the chips degrade in value as you take them. So the first red that's going to be taken, or the first gold or whatever, is going to be a higher value. And some of the stacks, like the lower colors, if you will, the more common ones, there's a ton of chips. But taking those is more specific. The ones that you want to get early are higher value in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about games like Jaipur, it's easy to pass it off as an old game. I mean, I haven't played my copy of Jaipur in years, just because you keep chasing the cult of the new.
Yeah.
But every time you start talking about it, it just makes me want to go back and play it again.
Plus camels. Like, if you want a game with camels, which is a silly thing to say, one of the cool aspects is camels is another thing that you can score, and camels also gives you the flexibility of taking a lot more cards at once, because you can take a bunch of cards and just replace them with camels. There's a lot of tension in this game too, because whenever you do that, whenever you take a lot of cards, there's a mechanic where you're refilling the row, and what you don't want to do in this game is refill the row at the end of your turn for the new player to go, oh look, 3 gold. So yeah, Jaipur, classic two-player game. I don't ever see this leaving my top 10.
I need to get the app, that's for sure.
Oh, the app's great.
I don't have it.
I've played it even against the computer. It's very competitive.
All right, number 3. Number 3 for me is Star Wars Rebellion. You probably knew that this was going to be on my list. I am a huge Star Wars fan. However, that doesn't just mean I'm going to just play any Star Wars game or love any Star Wars game.
Sure.
I'm actually kind of picky when it comes to my Star Wars games and IP games in general, because I don't want something that feels goofy or silly. I want something that makes me feel like I'm in the IP or in that franchise. And there is no better game for that than Rebellion.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
I mean, this is one of the most thematic games I've ever played that is a true love letter to Star Wars. Now, again, caveat, this can be played with 4 players. You can have one team being the Rebellion and one team being the Empire. I don't like it at all because it just splits up your turn.
Yeah.
That's all it does. Like, you just have a person sitting next to you. It's just so much better as a 1v1 2-player game. And the whole asymmetric concept of this game is that the Empire is hunting down the Rebellion while also completing these super projects like building Death Stars or giant Star Destroyers and things like that. While the Rebellion is hiding out and they have a secret base that the Empire doesn't know about. And they're trying to complete these missions basically to score enough points against the Empire to win. Now, these missions are very thematic. There's some like gaining the Death Star plans. And then once you have the Death Star plans, you can go send a fleet to try to blow up the X-Wing. And so you can have these very thematic movie moments like the run on the Death Star, but in the board game, no outcome is determined. So you can steal the plans, go run at the Death Star, and your entire fleet gets destroyed by the Empire.
So you're rewriting Star Wars history.
So a lot of it is rewriting Star Wars history, but what I really like about it...
Just like the new movies.
Yeah, well, but what I really appreciate it is the thematic moments, the exciting moments that just naturally come out of the game. You'll have moments like the Empire has missions to capture one of your characters and put him in carbonite. Except maybe this time they captured Lando. They have Lando in carbonite, and you have to go rescue Lando.
Oh, interesting.
Which is neat. And the Empire might blow up a base. They might blow up a planet with the Death Star that they think is your base, and they might get your base, and then it's game over. They just randomly happen to blow up the right planet. I mean, these moments are super exciting, and the game does a really good job of keeping the pace. Neither side feels like you're ever out of the game, right? Even like the scrappy Rebellion, you can come back up. You can evacuate your base if the Empire finds it, and you can start over again somewhere new. So there's just so many different ways that this game can play out. I want to go play it right now. It's so much fun.
I'm glad you said that because I do want to play this. I've never played.
That surprises me.
I've not once ever played, and I'm a pretty big Star Wars fan. I wouldn't say I'm a complete fanboy, but I love Star Wars just like most people do. I've never played it because it is a bit of an intimidating looking game.
It can be like a 3-hour game to play.
So
it's an all-day kind of game.
You're now pitching against it for me.
However, it's the closest you're ever feeling like to being a kid playing with your old Star Wars toys.
Yeah,
you're building your X-Wings, your Star Destroyers, moving your Death Star. It's really cool.
I want to try it, but this is how. If you'll do this, you teach me and one other person who's never played it, because I definitely don't want to play you. I think I'll get destroyed.
It depends. I mean, I don't ever play like the Rebellion really ever. So I mostly play the Imperial side. So that is the side I am way more confident with. So it might be a little interesting.
Here's what I'll say. I will definitely play Star Wars Rebellion before we do another top 10 two-player game list.
Who knows when that'll be.
Exactly. My number 3 is not a giant game like that. It's not based on Star Wars. It is a game.
I like these little caveats, by the way.
It's
not also Star Wars Rebellion. It's a different game, I promise.
Well, we've had some overlap. This is definitely not overlap because mine is a little game called Crokinole.
Yeah, I learned Crokinole. I played Crokinole at BGG-Con for the first time ever.
When?
At BGG-Con 2 weeks ago.
For the first time?
For the first time.
You've never played with me?
No, we've never played together.
Oh my gosh. So interesting that you said that because I had never played Crokinole, but this is a game that's been around forever. It's a dexterity game. If you're not familiar, I'm setting up pictures right now, and you're flicking little discs, trying to get them into the center of the board. But it is so much more than that. It is so strategic. And when I say dexterity, I think a lot of people with board games, they think dexterity is like chaos, like Jenga, or like, oh, I have to have a steady hand. This is skill like playing pool or billiards.
Right.
And it really is. It really feels that way more than any other game I've ever played. And I, too, saw it at a couple conventions over the years, and I looked at it, and I saw a lot of people playing it. There's always like a Crokinole tournament at one of our local cons.
Every year there's a Crokinole tournament.
And one year, that tournament, one of the organizers came over to me and said, hey, someone didn't show up for their spot. You want to sit in? Like, it's easy to play. You'll probably have fun. I said, sure. I was done.
And the rest is history.
And now it's number 3 on my top 10 two-players list. I got a Crokinole board probably 3 or 4 years ago now. I love the game. The game. In fact, I kind of want another. I want to get, I have a really nice one. It was from Mayday, but there are some companies that make some really nice ones.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of want to get a really nice one.
Like a nice little
just
splurge.
to have it. Because I can tell you again, like some of these other games that will never leave my list, Crokinole will never be a game that I'm like, yeah, I never need to play Crokinole again. It's always a game that you can come back to and play.
And Crokinole is one of those games that is a classic game. It's been around, like you said, forever, and it will be around forever because it's so easy just to sit down and play. You can play that with anybody, your grandpa, your sister, your kid, because you're really just flicking discs, really. I mean, there's so much strategy into where you're flicking the discs. You have to try to hit your opponent's discs, and you're trying to create these chains, maybe where I hit one of your discs into another one of your discs and knock it off the Crokinole board. So there's a ton of strategy and also these really exciting moments where like you get that perfect shot and you're like, I can't believe it.
It's very exciting moments, and also if you have the right attitude about it, you can enjoy your play as much as you can enjoy your opponent's play because you can admire that skill that's being, like if you're playing.
Or that lucky shot that happens.
Or that you don't generally enjoy. If they are not a great player and they just luck out and you like clear 3 of your discs.
It happens.
It does happen, or someone's getting it in that center. But the skill involved with the game is enough to be a challenge, but not so much that people can't do it.
Right.
Everyone can every once in a while get one in that center hole or get a really good shot, and it's just enough to keep everyone wanting to play.
Since you're really just flicking, I mean, you can be pushing this any way you want. I mean,
well, you can't just slide it.
Well, you can't slide it, but I mean, if you're if you have some difficulties with dexterity,
sure.
I mean, there are tons of other ways that you can flick these discs. I mean, it's perfectly playable.
Yeah, Crokinole, if you see it and you've never played it and you see it at a convention, I urge you, take the 15 minutes to sit down and play it with someone. That's my number 3.
All right.
What's your number 2?
Well, number 2 is a game that you're probably saying, where is this on the list? This is Seven Wonders Duel. I mean, let's be honest. This is one of the most popular 2-player games of all time. In fact, it's number 2 on the BGG list. The only one that's higher than that was Twilight Imperium. Not Twilight Imperium, Twilight Struggle.
Number 2 on their top
two-player games. Yeah.
Well, it's also quite high overall.
Yeah, it is also quite high overall on the BGG top 100 games. I mean, and there's a reason for that. It takes that Seven Wonders theme, which a lot of people love Seven Wonders. It's a game that got a lot of us into the hobby. It still brings new people into the hobby, but it distills it down to a 2-player game.
And a very different game.
Well, it is different. It shares DNA. If you can play Seven Wonders, you can play Seven Wonders Duel. You're doing kind of the same things. You're taking resource cards to generate resources, to take better cards, increase your military strength, to build out these wonders. But what's really neat is the way that these cards come out in like a pyramid where they're kind of overlapping each other, and some of these cards are face down.
Yeah.
So every time you're taking a card, you're giving one of the other cards to your opponent.
Yeah.
And also, if you're the one responsible for letting a card flip over, it could be the perfect card for your opponent, and you just gave it to him. So part of the game is timing your pulls so that maybe you aren't the one that takes the last card off that makes another card flip. Now, there are 2 expansions out for this that I think make the game even better.
Yeah,
they kind of address that a little bit.
Yeah, the base game is fantastic.
Oh, yeah,
I love the base game.
So I was going to say, the base game is
fantastic. With that said, particularly the first expansion, Agora.
Yeah, no, Agora's the second expansion.
Oh, yeah, what's the first?
The first one was the Gods, Pantheon.
Yeah, Pantheon. Pantheon, please let me correct that. Pantheon expansion. If you're going to get one expansion, get Pantheon.
For sure.
Because Pantheon does let you actually have a lot more control over that staggering choice of cards like Ryan was talking about. Because in the base game, there are times where you can get to a point where you're like, well, he's going to get that card.
Right.
There's no way I can do anything about that because there are some limitations to what you do on your turn because effectively in the base game, you're always taking a
you're
card.
Always taking a card.
But in Pantheon, it gives you the action to do something else potentially.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you don't change the card draw.
It's interesting the way it flows. You're like seeding these God cards, and then in the second round, you're getting to potentially buy one of the ones that you seeded in the first round. So it gives you more to do, and yeah, more control.
And I've played this with all sorts of people too, like people who are not enthusiast gamers. It's not exactly, I wouldn't call this incredibly accessible. This is not like Jaipur. Jaipur is super accessible. This takes, you put this on the table, it takes the commitment of the other player to go, okay, because even as small as it is, there's a lot to look at and a lot of icons to kind of take in.
But I will say that it is a great game if you are a board gamer in the hobby, playing with somebody who's casual. Because if you're there, if you already know the game well enough to answer their questions, to help guide them through their turn, if you have a partner or somebody that's just like, doesn't really want to play games with you, I bet you could get them to play Seven Wonders Duel because it's quick, it's simple, and you're building something. You're building this tableau, you're building these wonders. It has this sense of progression and this feeling of like, oh, this is cool. I have my own little civilization here, which is really neat.
Yeah, and last but not least, it is also number 2 on my list.
Well, do you want to?
So Seven Wonders.
Got more to say?
I don't have too much more to say. It is probably, with reason, I think it's probably, other than the other one you listed, it is so high among all enthusiast gamers. And there were people who I think weren't into it at first, but with some of the expansions, it made it a little bit more interesting. And even the third expansion, if you're an enthusiast gamer and you thought Seven Wonders Duel wasn't doing enough for you, by the time you get the second expansion, Agora, there's a lot going on.
Agora is like a really meaty, like it has an area control and you're influencing these senators. It's really cool.
Pantheon does some things in the game that really perfect it. Agora do some things that really expand it to a much meatier game. So if you've tried it and you thought, try it again with all those things if you get the chance. There's a really good reason why this is so high on everybody's list.
Yeah.
So we are finally here to number 1. Ryan, I'm going to let you go first with your number 1. We put Seven Wonders Duel at number 2.
I did.
So I think it's interesting to see what we both have at 1.
Only because my number 1 game is also one of the greatest games ever made.
Oh boy.
Magic the Gathering. I mean, I can't talk about 2-player games without talking about Magic the Gathering. This is the game that started so much for our hobby.
Well, and you too.
Well, and for me too. And for a lot of people, I think we played Magic before I ever touched my first real board game.
Yeah.
But coming from a background of having played Magic growing up, played Magic all through college, I play Magic now, it has just made heavier games easier because there's just so much in Magic that has influenced game design over the past decade or two since it came out. And it's really evident when you go back and play Magic, especially as someone who's never played. You've seen all these other card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and any of these CCGs. I mean, Magic kind of started that craze.
It did.
And it's still around for good reason because the game is super solid, and they keep reinventing what Magic is every couple of years with new Magic sets. And while it might seem like it's impossible to keep up with all of that, you can play online. I play with Magic Arena, which is phenomenal. It really helps you get into Magic. It helps you get started, and it's free to play. You don't ever have to spend any money playing it, or you can spend money playing it, which you would spend money playing paper Magic anyway, so you can kind of make that call on your own. But there's just something about Magic that just constantly appeals to me. And yes, it is a game that can be played with more players. There's tons of other game modes. I'm not going to forget about games modes like Commander, which is like a wild mode where you have huge decks and the crazy powerful combos. I mean, people play this mode a lot.
But in its purest form.
But in its purest form, especially like in tournament play, best of 3, 1v1, it's just such a pure experience, and it's really a really mental game. I mean, the deck building and the crafting of these cards and the countering your opponent and figuring out what the meta is at any given time, it's super interesting.
That meta, I am not a Magic the Gathering player, but the interesting thing about it is one of the few games sort of in our sector, if you will, that comes closest to sort of video games that are on the esports circuit.
Exactly.
Because when I watch people who really know how to play Magic.
Did you say maggot?
Magic. When I watch people do that, or YouTubers who are talking about it, or even you talking about it, it's like you're talking about it like you're a microbiologist who knows everything about microbiology, and you're like, I'm like, what are you talking about?
There's a level of that when you really, really know Magic really well. I mean, there are people, I know Magic, but there are people that know Magic.
Yeah.
That they will tell you about cards from 10 years ago, and they'll tell you the value of those cards. And that's another thing, too. It's become such a collector's item. Some of these cards are incredibly valuable.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother thing.
It's a whole nother conversation.
And that brings me to my number 1, which is also not Magic. I'm going to caveat it again. Magic is a game that I admire, but it's probably not something that I'll ever get into. But it's easy to see why it would also be on a top 10 2-player games list. I mean, we owe a lot to that industry. But my number 1 is Quarto.
Yeah, I should have seen this one coming.
Absolutely.
I could have seen this one coming, I guess.
I've talked about Quarto a lot on the channel. It's even been, it's in my top 10 games of all time. This is a game that will often just be sitting out in the middle of a table in my house for anyone to just say, hey, you want to play a game of Quarto? Because it can be played very easily. Now, if you've not played Quarto, I'm going to give you a brief description. The beginning of that description is going to make you go, that doesn't sound very good. But I'm going to do it nonetheless. It's like tic-tac-toe on steroids.
Good.
Right. exactly. But if you play this once, I guarantee you, especially if you lose, you're going to want to play again immediately.
It's the steroids part that really makes it make sense.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a very beautiful wooden board, and there's all these pieces, and the pieces are tall, they're short, they're square, they're round. Some have holes in them, some are flat, and then there's dark ones and there's light ones.
Dr. Seuss book.
You can play with a fox. You can play in a box. No, but there's all these different pieces, and the common mistake, including Ryan, has ever made is you think, oh, well, mine are these pieces.
Yeah.
No, if you read the rules, you'll realize all the pieces are in one pool, and all those different variables and the differences between them are what you have to kind of take into consideration while you're playing. Mm-hmm. The other hook is, on your turn, effectively, the other player is going to give you your piece to play. So we talked a lot today about not letting the other player win. This game is nothing but not letting the other player win, because when you pick up a piece and it's your opponent's turn and you're giving it to them to play, you better make sure that they can't win with that piece.
Yeah, that's the that's the part that really twists your brain.
Yeah, and the way you win with the piece is you're getting 4 in a row. Orthogonally in one row or diagonally across the middle of the board. It's a very simple board. But when you get 4 in a row of either 4 dark, 4 light, 4 round, 4 square, basically 4 in a row that have this one similar variable, you win the game. So that means you could have 4 in a row that have some lights and darks, some rounds and squares, but they're all flat, or they all have a hole in them, or they're all short, or they're all tall, those sorts of things. And it has just enough variables like that to make any gamer have to go, oh, there's one too many variables for me to have a mastery of this.
And then and the best part about it is when your opponent wins, it's because you gave them the win every time.
Yeah, it's so delicious because you'll be playing and you know you're about to win, and you see your opponent put their finger on one, and you're like, yes, go ahead, give me that one. And then you take it and you go, yep, boom, right there. It is such a fun game, and it rarely, if ever, ends in a stalemate. A lot of people will think, okay, games like this, they often end in a stalemate, like tic-tac-toe.
Right.
Almost never does that happen. Now, there will get to a situation where you have so many pieces on the board that, kind of like Seven Wonders Duel, you'll look at the pieces that are left, you'll know the cycle of the turns that are left, and you'll go, oh, unless they screw up,
right,
I'm dead.
Me, right.
Like if we both make good turns every turn, I am dead. But that happens really late game. The beautiful thing about this game is you can teach it to someone, and I'm pretty ruthless in this game. I don't usually go all in when I'm teaching a game,
right.
But this game is unique in that when you beat someone quickly, they want to play again.
Right, because now that you kind of understand how the game plays,
and
you can
beating
go back with a little bit of a better grasp.
Yeah, and beating someone quickly happens in 2.5 minutes sometimes.
Right, I mean, this is like checkers, chess, style of game. Like it's not a long game. Well, I guess chess can be long.
Chess can be a long game, but you're just giving pieces back and forth, and as soon as you win, you're able to kind of point out like, oh yeah, you didn't see these are all flat or these are all dark. I can't recommend Quarto enough. It's been around for a while now. It's from Gigamic. So they have a line of all those wooden games. For my money, Quarto is by far the best of those games. And that is the last of our top 10 two-player games.
We almost had a full 20. I think we only had a little bit of overlap there.
We had 2 games overlapping.
Seven Wonders Duel, Land vs. Sea, Watergate.
Oh, three games overlapping, which not a good, not a bad.
Not a good sign?
Not a good sign.
No, there's so many good two-player games out there.
Yeah, we could give honorable mentions, but we'll be here for another hour talking,
true.
So we're not going to do that.
There were so many that were just like so close.
But let us know what you think of our top 10s.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know what your top 10s are, or at least just some of your favorite two-player games.
Yeah, the ones that we missed.
Oh, and there's plenty.
I'm sure there are.
And if you have any questions about any of the games that we didn't cover too thoroughly, ask them down below. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.